Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So we have some interesting things to talk about, and you're going to help sort this out for me because, sometimes I get a little bit confused about all this neoconservative, and what I'm really working on is what Donald Trump believes.
Oh,
so
good luck.
This is a challenge because generally speaking, I know what the neoconservatives believe, and we're going to be talking about the neoconservatives, but we want to talk about Trump's policy, and that is that he sort of shifted a little bit, on Russia. I can't figure out exactly what's going on, and also Syria. He's talking about coming home from Syria, and the fact that Donald Trump had the audacity to call Putin and congratulate him. My goodness, just every other president did it. But we're not our program doesn't hype Donald Trump.
Yeah.
But when some of these things goes on, if he wouldn't have called him, they'd have yelled and screamed. Every president calls, no matter what they are, even back when they were, the communists, they called him and talked to people. So either way, he would have lost on that. But anyway, he does do some shifting around because if you look at his appointments, it's one thing, on policy is something else. I mean, I'm surprised that he even hinted that he might come home from Syria, which I think you have some doubts about that, as I do, on whether that's going to really happen. But at least it got the attention of the neoconservatives. They all of a sudden, hey, what are you doing? That's our oil. Yeah. And of course, isn't that what Trump used to say? He says, we'll go in there and we'll get the oil and they'll pay for all this and that sort of thing. But I want to read a quote from Trump, about how he thinks, at that moment, how we should be talking to Russia. And this sort of ignores the fact that on other issues, such as the diplomats, it's a bit of a different position. It's punished before you even know what's going on. And he goes along with the neoconservatives. But this is what he said about the phone call. He says, I called President Putin of Russia to congratulate him on his election victory. In past, Obama called him also. The fake news media is crazed because they wanted me to excoriate him. They are wrong. Getting along with Russia and others is a good thing, not a bad thing. Hey, that fits into our program.
Yeah.
So good. Maybe we're winning him over. So no, this is very good. But it also drove the neocons nuts over this. And the interesting thing there, and the contradiction and the dilemma that I have is, why is he appointing, the most arch neoconservatives? When you look at it, you have Bolton and you have Haley in the administration, Pompeo and Haspel. I mean, these are his top people, and he's putting his, cabinet together, after a year or so. So I guess we'll have to keep figuring this out. But even though I think the neocons are fairly predictable.
Well, it is interesting. The March 20th phone call to President Putin, it leaked. So one of his staff close to him leaked out his advisors saying, do not congratulate, and he did call and congratulate. So someone close to him is leaking it. But the neocons went nuts. How dare he not follow the advice of his advisors? We're always critical about presidents taking too much power unconstitutionally, but this is one area where he does have some legitimate authority to make foreign policy. Since when people didn't vote for his advisors, they voted for him as president. So they went crazy about this. And now they're going crazy because it comes out that actually when they talked, they said, hey, let's get together. Why don't you come over to the White House? So that's just driven them nuts. And I've got a few things they said later on about it, but it's just...
Yeah, and just go back to we're trying to figure him out. He's been pretty tough. His language has been very, very tough on in North Korea.
Yeah.
And yet now it's more open to discussion and getting together and this sort of thing. So it does change. And I keep wondering whether this is a deliberate strategy of his on how he does negotiations, or whether he is influenced by certain people at a particular time and he changes his mind. But anyway, he's not very predictable, which isn't exactly the best thing in the world, that a leader with this much authority is unpredictable because you don't know actually where he stands.
Yeah. Well, you can kind of pick anywhere the neocons lurk and find them going crazy over this. And I picked the New Republic, where there's a lot of neocons hanging out, and Nina Yankovitz. She's a global fellow at the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute. How ironic, because Kennan later in life came to regret the way his Mr. X cable was interpreted, the policy of containment. So here's a woman writing for the New Republic, mad that he did not criticize Trump over the Skripal case. She said, here's the headline of her article: "At what point can we say Trump is sabotaging Russian policy?" Well, Trump makes Russian policy.
Right.
What is he talking about? And here's just a sentence from it, and I'll just read one sentence, what she said. "Trump's silence at a time when most Westerners are raising their voices in stark opposition to the Kremlin is part of his multi-year symphony of praise for Putin."
Yeah, and the one thing about the Republican and Democratic leadership, they're pretty consistent in supporting neoconservative and the foreign policy, because both Republicans and Democrats were strongly in favor of, answering back to Skripal's thing. Oh, well, it's over and done with. The Russians are guilty. We have to punish them. And then they started this, back and forth on how many diplomats were going to be expelled. And they all went along with it, and they cheered it on. So it's one of those things where the neocons are very, very powerful. And even when Trump talks about the fake news media, I think, well, we see the fake news media as part of the neoconservatives. So he's out there, attacking them, which I think they deserve the criticism.
And they went crazy that he didn't criticize over the Skripal case. But what's interesting is this case continues to fall apart. As you point out, the UK lab forced the language to be very carefully crafted, may have all sorts of qualifiers in it. It never said this is what military grade. So we have the daughter making a miraculous recovery. This is the most toxic poison in the history of the universe. She's making a recovery. I'd be worried if I were her. But you have other things. Follow this. First of all, they were poisoned at the restaurant. That was the first thing. No, that didn't work out. So they were poisoned through the car vents. That's how they were poisoned. No. They were poisoned on the doorknob of their house. And then yesterday, the Daily Mail said, well, we think they were actually poisoned in their cereal that they had this morning. So they have no idea how this poison was delivered, but they're sure the Russians did it.
Yeah, and they never say allegedly. Most of the crimes committed in this country, and they're very careful because they don't want to be sued. They say, hey, this has been alleged, but not once have they mentioned that. And then it, to me, was amazing how much support came from the West. Every NATO country joined in. There were a few that refused to do it, but a huge number of people, even if it was just for token effort, they might kick out one diplomat and all, but just to show support from this. But Trump gave overwhelming support for this, so it sort of contradicts this. This would have been a chance to say, hey, why don't you prove the case?
Yeah.
But then, of course, the neocons are going to go nuts anyway, just for making a phone call. But I just don't quite understand this strategy.
Yeah, the escalation was really out of hand, and maybe as we talked about at the time, maybe it has something to do with Iran and next month's certification of the Iran deal. Maybe he made a deal with Theresa May or something on that. So it's hard to know why he went so overboard. But a lot of European countries did not expel anyone. Austria, which has a new government, it has a new prime minister who is much more even-handed, I think. He's refused to kick some out. So it's not unanimous by any stretch.
Yeah, in the position he holds on Iran, the Trump holds on Iran, has been rather consistent. And if he were to leave Syria, which he probably won't, and then the Iranians gain the upper hand, it would fall into the hands of the Iranians, and that would contradict his whole stated policy, which has been rather consistent. We don't want to do anything, because that fits into the support for Israel and Saudi Arabia, because they're getting really buddy-buddy right now.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, that's the support for the war in Yemen. So it's one of these things that sorting it all out is difficult. It's much easier to sort out when you're a non-interventionist, you know. And if it is the oil, I mean, we brag, we have the oil, a third of Syria. We own that. That's our oil, and that sort of falls into the Trump philosophy. But you know, when you think about it, we have more oil in this country than some people thought we had, you know, 5-10 years ago. We have a tremendous amount of oil. Keep discovering it. We could be self-sufficient on oil. At the same time, the only reason that we would actually think this is a practical thing to do is if you plan to maintain the empire forever.
Yeah.
You know, you do need a lot of oil, to run all this military equipment. And besides, how can we sell weapons if they don't run their equipment? So yes, the oil is important. We wouldn't want we would not want Assad to have any control of Syria.
Of his own oil, yeah. Well, speaking of non-interventionism, what you said earlier, I think this is probably one of the best quotes I've ever seen from the president, and it sounds great. Quote, "We'll be coming out of Syria very soon, very soon. We'll be coming out. We're going to get back to our country where we belong." That sounds pretty good.
Well, I started off with a good one, and you found another one there.
Where we belong, you know, that's...
Maybe we should rest. Maybe we have achieved our goal, and he's become a non-interventionist. Of course, which gets to be pretty silly, you know, when you think about it. But it's almost, I keep trying to put it together where maybe his words are just words to satisfy a certain group, a base, and keep his groups together. At the same time, his actions are the only thing that really counts. Yeah. And the actions do not satisfy or they do not complement the quote you had or the one I had, because his actions are in tremendous support for the neoconservatives. And it could boil down to just personalities. You know, I think in spite of very strong philosophic positions, I know that dealing in politics, whether it's Republicans or libertarian politics, personalities still count. Yeah. So it might be that, you know, if you had somebody that's a George Bush in there, maybe he's more diplomatic and say the same thing and do the same things. So it might be that they just hate his guts because he's a little more bold, and he's going to do it his way, even though he ends up doing it their way.
Well, we had a good article we put up on the Ron Paul Institute website. We got it from Mike Roseff, who wrote it for Lou Rockwell's side originally. He's a professor, and it was kind of like an open letter to Senator Lindsey Graham. Senator Graham, of course, had a hissy fit when Trump said we need to get out of Syria. He just made all kinds of points, and Roseff did a good job of just one by one. And if I can just go down, there's just 3 of them that I think are worth mentioning. The argument that Graham made: ISIS will come back if we leave. Well, Roosevelt said, hey, the Syria coalition will defeat ISIS again if they start coming back. They've got Syria, they've got Hezbollah, they've got Iran, they've got Russia support. And if you think about it, if Israel's biggest enemy is Hezbollah, which they say, then they also have some incentive to stop playing footsie with some of the jihadists in Syria. So they don't want that to happen. That's one. Number 2, the Turk-Kurdish war will heat up if we pull out. Well, as Roosevelt points out, it was U.S. military aid to the Kurds that caused the Turks, that provoked the Turks to come in to Syria in the first place. That's 2. And number 3, we can't leave when we've got ISIS on the ropes. And Roosevelt argues that we didn't put ISIS on the ropes. It was the Syria, Russia, Iran coalition that did. And they have all the facilities they need to finish the job. So goodbye, Mr. Graham.
You know, there's one thing for sure. The position that the Russians are the bad guys are really supported by the Washington Post and the New York Times. And there was a time, you know, when they were winding down the Vietnam War, they were sort of the pro-peace people. They were liberals against the war. But boy, they are really hawkish on that. And I think that's a sign that Trump is up against the wall on this, and he has to contend with that. So I think that it's something that we're going to be talking about. But there is one item, and I don't think we have time to get into today, that I hope we can visit with it about that, is the hint today that Trump might consider a pardon for Assange.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really, really interesting stuff. And what what interests me on that is he's an Australian journalist and he's never been charged with a crime.
That we know of,
and look at what the world's done to him.
Yeah.
You talk about ganging up, and in a way, it's that attitude where they've ganged up on the Russians too. Without evidence, and then they use the if we don't go along with it, then the accusation is oh, you're pro-Russia, you're anti-American, you're so unpatriotic, and you don't care about the security of our intelligent people. This sort of thing. So one of these days we'll get further involved in that issue.
Yeah, that is a great point. He's had his internet pulled, his connection to the outside world pulled. He's not allowed visitors now. And I'm sure the governor of Ecuador is under enormous international pressure to do this, but he's completely isolated. We've reached out to some people that we know on his team, and we hope we can actually get him on the show to look at some of the legal implications of this. So hopefully we'll do that. So I would just close by reminding everyone once again of our conference on the 29th. I haven't announced it on the show yet, but Representative Mark Sanford will be joining us and give a short speech. He will open the conference. So it'll be a good opportunity to listen to someone who's a sitting member of Congress talk about the need for a non-interventionist foreign policy. You see the website where you can go to get your tickets. They're going fast.
Very good. And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today, and I want to reiterate what Daniel just said about our conference. To us, that is very important. The support is strong, and it's amazing to me how long-lasting that is, because after it's over, it's just not a 4-hour program and that's it. We had a lot of follow-up in the last couple years when we've had these conferences, and that I think is very important. So to us, the issue of non-intervention is so important. Sorting it out is important. We do our best to sort it out and find out where people stand. I don't believe that deep down in Donald Trump's heart that he's a dedicated neoconservative, and yet there's so many contradictions. And we want to give credit to the president when he's right, and when the neocons and the media is harsh and wrong and just just over the top, then we'd like to point that out. But the whole point is that we do hear good messages. We read 2 from Trump today where it made a lot of sense. We ought to be friends with Russia, and we ought to talk about getting troops out of Syria. So the big question is, we know where the neocons stand. That's one thing about the neocon. But the big thing is how serious is Trump on some of these issues? So we want to try to analyze that the best we can and bring you, what we think is the truth to the best of our abilities. But I do want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.